today you are joining Christina Ciccone and I. This is the fourth of 5 episodes that we're doing as a series that are diving into each of the 5 elements, and that's described by the Taoist traditions, and how it relates to your spiritual business and you as a spiritual entrepreneur. So here we are. We are going to dive into the metal element and the fall season. We use those terms interchangeably in this world, and I'm so lucky that I get to hang out with you and record these episodes. I feel like I would do this. I mean, I feel like we did this for years before I had a podcast, just over tea. And now it just feels like everyone gets to join us on this journey, and I'm so grateful that we get to just share this.
Yeah, thanks for making them happen. It's such a pleasure.
So, not gonna lie, I much prefer when we are recording in person together.
It's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. We do what we can so they still move forward, but yeah, it's pretty nice to be in person. Yeah.
I just want to reach out and hi.
Remember when?
Yeah.
Soon. I get to see you soon at least. That's nice.
It's true. I'm going to be coming up to Vancouver this week, so we're recording this and then I'll be there.
Yeah, and getting to enjoy the beginning of fall in Vancouver, where the 4 or 5 seasons are fairly obvious. You know, they dance around as do seasons across the world, but yeah, it's kind of fun to live in a place where they're very clearly 5 seasons.
Yeah, and fall is actually, I don't know, I think it's a tie between spring and fall for me in terms of my favorites, with Vancouver specifically.
Fall. I love fall. Yeah, I'm getting excited for fall. My summer-loving friends are mad because they're like, no, I'm not ready. And I'm like, it's okay, I'm ready now.
Fall, I mean, summer, I know that this is not a popular opinion, but summer is definitely not my favorite of the seasons.
Yeah, I'll take a bit, but yeah, clearly not what I need the most of. Or maybe sometimes what you have. I was born in the summer, so maybe maybe you have a lot of, and you crave its balance. So yeah, depending on, it's an interesting point of reflection as a listener. What is your favorite season? When was your birthday? Is it, is your favorite season coincide with your birthday? Is it different? What is it that you love about fall? And one of the things that I love about fall, which is what some people's least favorite thing is, I love the pruning down and the paring back and the reflective and the, making room for new things. So, it's funny. We all have our preferences, but that's something that comes up in the fall that I actually really enjoy.
Yeah. I think the place that I want to start is, I was talking about this with Sean the other day, my partner, and was asking him, I'm in the middle of building out the curriculum for the metal module of BAM, and so I was just sort of conversationally asking him, what's your favorite part of fall? And he has no Taoist medicine background. He's kind of a dude bro, a sensitive dude bro, but he's a pretty dude bro. And, even he had some really insightful things to say about the fall. And one of my favorite things that he said was, summertime is about going out and doing. And so we've landed here in Washington, so we've been rafting and hanging out in the river and going hiking and doing all these things. And Sean was saying that he loves fall because it's a moment to slow down, and the world becomes so beautiful that you can't help but stop and look and be in a witnessing space. And so, we're really excited about
sensitive dude bro. What a sensitive dude bro. I love that. And it's so great to hear people's reflections when you don't, that's the wonderful thing about the Tao is that you don't need to be trained in the Tao
Exactly.
to be in tune with it. And that's a lot of our really intuitive, natural things. That's all it's about, is it's getting back to those things. So what an absolutely beautiful way to phrase that observation. I absolutely adore that.
Yeah. And it got me thinking about, like, some of my favorite things about the fall season is that there's like a crispness in the air that like really draws you into your body. And it really awakens that connection that you have to the somatics. Like, you can't, like, I don't know how to explain it, but there's like a feeling in the air with fall that feels very, very uniquely fall, you know? And it's that like hit of crispness that like brings you straight back into your body, and that's something that I really appreciate about the fall. And I think that you probably have a lot to say about that too, because you're a pretty metally human.
I do love the metals, yeah, and we always like to give a little overview of the five elements. Also come from yin yang theory, which I'm just going to go ahead and say probably all of your listeners are fairly familiar with on some level at this point. But
and if you're not, we've got 9 episodes specifically about the 5 elements. So if you just go back and start searching for the ones about elements, you can go find those. But episode 21 is specifically about the metal elements that we recorded last year.
Yeah, and we always check in a little bit with the elements, a little overview. And so that really, I like that you feel that on a visceral level, because in yin-yang theory, where fall is in, spring and summer are the most yang, which is the most upward and outward directed. So if you think of, I love the image of even just like the sun on the horizon. So if you think of dawn as the spring, and then high noon is summer, and you've got this hot, warming sun, and you also think of where you are in your body. This is a very, they would call it, an old, very celestial, ethereal place. You're in your mind, you're getting inspiration, you're getting these intuitive downloads from the heavens, and then when we start into transition into the late summer, and then when we hit fall, and this metaphor comes up in literature across all cultures and things, fall is often also thought of the evening time, like we're coming into the evening of our day, of our business, of our lives, or whatever it is. These cycles go around in micro and macro levels all the time. So fall is often thought of that cooler evening time, which is the beginning of being into a yin phase of the year, which means if yang is very outward, upward, unformed, I've often used the metaphor of the stem cell that can become anything, but this is like yin is now we're starting to take shape. This is very earthy. It's these heavenly inspirations are starting to condense and take on form. Like, what have your ideas become? Oh, now we see it. And it could be anything, but for you, it showed up as, whatever it is. It showed up as a blog. It showed up as an offering. It showed up as a body working session. Like, it could be, these things take shape and form. You made a beautiful, something out of pottery. Like, it's giving form to things. And our body is also very, very yin. Like, we have this sort of spiritual self that is housed in our very yin, very earthy, very physical form. And those things, they may look a little different, but they're on this sliding scale. They are not separate, because when they separate finally, that is what we would term as like a human death, is when yang goes back up to the heaven, yin goes back down into the earth, the body separates from the soul. And so before that, they work together all the time. And it's interesting to start to feel into our body and tap in, like, what is the language that it uses to communicate with us? Because now we're less into the thinking and into the feeling communication, the physical sensations, the dropping into, okay, not just an idea, but like, how does this actually feel? How does this express itself in a real material life?
Yeah, absolutely. And, in our tradition, we associate that, that connection to the body as being the po, or the corporeal soul. And another way that I've heard it described from my teachers is it's the animal soul. And again, I think that this goes back to what we were just sharing about this connection that we have within our bodies, regardless of what species you are born in. Our nervous systems are fairly similar. The fact that we have breath is fairly similar. The fact that we release our poop is very similar. And, in the metal element, our organs that are associated with metal are the lungs and the large intestine. And so I think that you were talking about this really beautifully before we started recording, and I kind of want you to elaborate on this, of this concept of breathing room, of there being space for breath. And that's something that we can really talk about in terms of business. Like, I'm seeing this all the time where people get quite cluttered with, even if it's just their to-do list or the things that I should do or the offerings that I'm putting out, we can get quite cluttered. And so this concept of breathing space is something that really sparked my curiosity, and I want to hear more from you about what that means to you.
Yeah, raise your hand if you would like more room to breathe. Breathing room. Yeah, I love that those two organs were paired together in this classical system, because there's such a continuous flow. Like, we breathe in with our lungs and things exit through the large intestine, and it's very, very balanced. And there's this concept that you can't just do one or the other, or you're going to be in trouble pretty soon. You can't just keep breathing in, taking on. There has to be an exhale and a letting go, or there has to be, a letting go and a releasing from the bowels. Like, you cannot just continually, and vice versa. You can't just keep letting go and jettisoning everything and never replenish and breathe in again. And so I love how those two form such a beautifully balanced system. And that just seems also so practical to me as a guide for how I would want to also structure my business, is this balance between what am I taking on and what am I letting go of. And having learned what we learned over the years, and, through experience, it's nice to be able to think about setting things up differently. We have these cycles where, we breathe and eat and, have a bowel movement hopefully every day. But in your business, like, are you just set up to keep taking in and taking on? I love that I get to sit down and set aside time that I'm going to intentionally, because I get to make those calls if it's my business. There's going to be time to clear my inbox. There's going to be time to go through old photos. There's going to be time to, we get to write these structures from the beginning when it's ours. And so I, as a former designer, that's something I love, because I was always, in my head a lot, and to be able to drop down into the body and ask it, when do I get to take care of its needs? Because I think so much of our business is done from the head space. Like, we don't actually think, even if you're in body work. I mean, you and I are acupuncturists by trade too. Like, even when you're working on other people's bodies, very rarely are you taught to design in time to take care of your own body. It's sort of this thing that you're just expected to do at some point in your schedule, as an afterthought outside of the business sphere. But what if that is drawn into the business sphere?
Yeah.
And that space to breathe and to step back and to not just be taking in and taking on, that breathing room to stand back with clarity and make decisions is so important, and so wonderful that we as new entrepreneurs can start to think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important to be rooted in your somatics and to be rooted in your body, that it is the second lesson that is part of the BAM curriculum. Because if we don't have a connection to the body, then everything that comes after, in terms of like the decisions that we're going to make together in BAM, or you know, the how-tos that we go over, if we don't have that basic foundation of what does your body feel like when it's safe, and what does it feel like when it's under threat, and even just that question by itself can lead you on two completely different trajectories when it comes to your business. And having that awareness of what does safety feel like and what does threat feel like. And to me, when other business courses just layer on strategy and strategy and strategy, and I have so many clients who come to me and they say, I've taken so many business courses, I'm so overwhelmed. It's because of this. It's because we didn't get a foundation of what does your body feel like when you're safe. And, in that space of not feeling safe, if we add on more strategy, then it's just going to end up feeling more and more overwhelmed. And then you start feeling bad about yourself, and you get all this shame around, I already know what I'm supposed to be doing, and why can't I do that? And, it becomes this like, almost self-fulfilling prophecy of not being able to, complete these goals that you've set out for yourself. And ultimately it goes back to asking your body what felt unsafe in that situation, and how can we bring you to a sense of safety so that we can enact these decisions, and we can enact these actions from an aligned and authentic and intentional space.
Yeah, what an amazing thing. Even and just to start with noticing, like, yeah, that's such a wonderful starting place for businesses. Or just your life. What do you feel like when you're safe? And this is where our animal corporeal soul comes in. It's like, oh, I'll tell you, but I'm not going to tell you in written form or verbal form. I'm going to tell you as in, fatigue or hunger. Or I know in one episode we talked about when I didn't want to do design anymore, and I had severe carpal tunnel and I couldn't do design anymore.
Yeah.
And, these messages that come up in your body is so in tune with, you have the thoughts, and then you have physical reactions, and they work together. And often we tend to focus too much on the mind, too much on the taking in. When were you letting go of the things that weren't working for you? If you took a few business courses and you've got a pile of resources that you're not finding that helpful, or not now, how do you prune them back and put them aside, and not just have this, overabundance of intake without the outflow, and or even just
constipated.
Yeah. And emotionally constipated, and just like, or just feeling obliged, like, oh, I should hang on to that. And that's one of the things I love about the metal element, is that it's also it's an element of, it's a highly crafted, refined tool for pruning and cutting back, but it's refined, and it's one of its strengths is clarity. It can be polished to a reflective surface. It can be crystalline in form. Crystal clear is, something we use in the English language. And that's so much the metal element is, being so in line with what is in balance or what works for you and doesn't, that you can easily sort of separate the two and cut back on things that weren't working for you. And the emotion we associate with the metal element is grief. So, which is another emotion that gets undervalued, and people maybe want to run away from, but grief doesn't always have to be this devastating, unbearable, you'll never come out the other side sort of emotion. It can, sometimes things, there's deep grief as well, and that needs process. And I love that you say grief loves ceremony. But even in the small things, letting go of a course that you don't need anymore, letting go of a business practice. Sometimes you're ready to let go, but you feel a bit sad about it, and that's okay. Like, grieve the job you wanted to leave, grieve the certificate you let go, have a moment. You can be, sad and fulfilled and ready and happy all at the same time. I think, it's a shame we get taught, if you're grieving, you can't feel possibly anything else. And I think you and I have been in those scenarios where it's like, I need to grieve because I'm letting go of something meaningful, but I'm also complete and fulfilled and happy. And, it's those things aren't separate.
Yeah. I'm being reminded as you're speaking of, I had a session with a client yesterday, and she is in the process of deciding whether or not she wants to give up a board certification for a career that she no longer wants to be in. And I had very publicly 2 years ago burned my acupuncture license. And so she was asking me, what was your thought process around that? And so I was sort of coaching her to guide her to make her own decision, because I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this. I made a decision to not renew my acupuncture license when I quit, and it was something that felt very right for me at the time. And also, reflecting back on that experience from 2 years ago, it has sort of crystallized even more for me, because as I continue to do this work around pulling out, I don't even want to call it capitalism, because I think that it is the extractive system that we all live in, and capitalism and the toxic practices around capitalism is one of those aspects of it. But I started to realize how degrees and certifications and these like markers of like these gold stars that we're meant to go for and achieve have its roots in capitalism and colonialism. And this is not to say I don't value my education. I 100% value the education that I got. I also value the degree and the license that I received. But to me, it was the value of the experience of getting that knowledge that was more important to me than the actual piece of paper. Yeah. And so I've talked about on this podcast before how I feel like I am able to practice Taoist medicine even more fully now without the needle in my hands, because Taoist medicine is ultimately about how do you find your Tao? How do you find your purpose? And how do you ripple that out into your community? And, as I started thinking about, well, where do all these gold stars come from? I have a suspicion. I haven't actually confirmed this through research, but I have a suspicion. So if anybody out there knows, I invite you to share with me any of this history, that a lot of that came from trying to devalue traditional and indigenous wisdom. Because if I think about, even in our tradition of Taoist medicine, nobody gave these philosophers a degree and a fancy piece of paper and was like, oh, now you are a certified Taoist practitioner. It was, really inquisitive, curious souls who sat out in nature and wanted to see how this like macrocosm of nature fit into the macrocosm of the human body, of the human spirit. Back then it was also infused into their political system. And so like it was, it wasn't anybody on this like hierarchical level being like, here's a degree, And I even think about some of my clients who are herbalists, and they will sometimes devalue their medicine because they're like, oh, I didn't get an herbalism training. And yet when I ask them to explain to me what yarrow represents, what mullein represents, and they go into these depths based on their particular traditional lineages, like, that is so valuable. And just because you didn't get a piece of paper from an institute saying, you checked off all these courses, or you read all these books, or you took all these, classes, and somehow their wisdom is less valuable than somebody who has been through that herbalism training.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not putting down anyone's path in this. It's just I'm putting this out there as a point of examination, and being like, okay, so if we start valuing workshops and courses for the experience versus the shiny piece of paper at the end of it, how would that change and shift what courses you took, or how, like, what your intentionality is behind those courses that you take. And I think that when I think of my own sort of educational path after I burned my license, I've taken so many courses and workshops, and I don't have a single fancy piece of paper at the end of it. But to me, it is so important and has been so integral to how I practice my medicine that I honestly don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to tease apart. And I like that you're throwing out the inquiry of when did this start? Where does this come from? How does this relate to innate wisdom, traditional practices versus accumulated, book smarts, and who's doing the regulating? Because I think there is a time and a place that, part of there's a time and a place for testing for competency, I think. and we do want to see someone who is competent or safe and do a fair exchange. And maybe we do things so quickly now that, perhaps in past, if you had a whole community watching someone apprentice and grow up, like, you could verify without a certifying body that they were a safe person. They had to basically prove themselves. And now we have so many people, and how do you pick a person off the list or the roster to go see for, financial advice or law advice or medicine, or, and there's many different types and many different ways. So there's a few conversations that come into play in this.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. We've become, I think in that rush, we became so reliant on the gold star or certifying system. And then, you and I have I think more than one degree, and that's where the clarity comes in. What do you need for yourself, and what do you need for your path? You might need to get a certification. Or is there, that's something to check in with yourself. Are you trying to get the more because that comes from a place, is it coming from a place of not enoughness?
Yeah,
I'm not
exactly.
enough. I'm not competent enough. I need more before I can, because we undervalue things that are just intuitive and, things that you don't need data points for, that, things that are the known, or you can you take enough and then just work on it? And is it time to just practice and experiment and grow? And if you're building a bridge, that might not be the time to intuitively practice for a large scale city project. But there's, there's a little bit of common sense in yourself where this will apply and where this won't apply. But absolutely, I think there's what we see, I think, for, in our peers and in your clients and in ourselves, definitely very prevalent in my past, for sure. I have, a few different types of school under my belt. And I know there's a large portion of that came from, I'm not ready, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. If I just get more training, if I just understand one thing more thoroughly, then I will be of more value. And that's a tricky place to know when to stop. And you just really have to learn how to self-evaluate.
Yeah, absolutely. And
From
I think
self-value.
that it brings, yeah, absolutely. And I think that it brings into this like concept of making sure, like, I think that some of the certifications have come about because we want ethical practices in a field. And that's an incredibly valuable thing to want. And we also have to stand in the like inquiry of, okay, so is this a hoop that is behind a paywall, is behind, you know, some form of hierarchical structure that we need to be examining? And it's one of these things where I actually have mixed feelings about the coaching world, because there's no certification around coaching. In terms of like a governing body, there's definitely certifications out there of like different programs that you can take. But, you know, in one hand, I feel really excited that there's this space where people can practice their specific medicine, whether it's somatics or, you know, ancestral healing or inner child work, in a space that's actually very freeing. But then we're left to our own inner sense of ethics and intentions. And whenever there's a system that has holes in it, there's going to be people who are taking advantage of that. And to me, again, this goes back to the body, because if somebody is taking advantage of that on some level, and you know, the internet is strife with folks who are doing this, that can't feel good in your body. And so if you are a person of good moral judgment, again, these are all sort of like metal concepts that we're talking about here, right? If you're a person of good moral judgment, then you will take it upon yourself to make sure that you are ethical in the way that you practice and treat people and support and build your business. And, you know, and this is an ever evolving field. You know, I feel like trauma work we're just scratching the surface on trauma work. And so we're finally able to put some form of language of the things that we've been all unconsciously conditioned to do. And so in that space of unraveling, can you have forgiveness for yourself to not do it perfectly right away, you know, and that the steps that you are making are good enough, and that we continue to have to break down, how can I be more ethical in business? How can I be more ethical with my clients and in my practice? And I think that that's a very individual journey. And again, I think that this sort of goes back to this conversation that I had with my client around, you know, do you release that certification or do you not? And again, there's no right or wrong answer, but I think that it brings up all these really interesting questions about how does this certification and certifications in general, how do they fit into these bigger systems, and what is your participation within that?
Yeah, I'm struck by the concept of sort of self-regulation and self-responsibility in this, both as a business provider and receiver, or, you know, whatever kind of interactions you have. And that also doesn't mean that you don't ever go to others for help or advice or feedback
100%.
or draw on their experience. But there's going to be times, it seems, in life where things work very well in a repeatable, known way, and it's great to pay attention to those outcomes, but that's, you know, a small portion of phenomena in all the things we encounter in this existence. And there's going to be a whole host of things that don't fit very well into double-blind, repeatable studies. And so, you know, this is something that happened to classical Chinese medicine in the past. When you try to amputate the parts that don't fit into your model, then you lose, you know, what is the you lose a lot of the things that actually make it work very, very well and very effective, but they just don't play very nicely in your in this model that you're trying to shove it to. And on the flip side, in the coaching space, that question came up, like, what is the cost of freedom? Like, if we give people freedom to not have to squash into a model because we know we're going to lose something in that process, then it becomes very important for us to cultivate those practices of being able to discern and to regulate and to clarify for ourselves, to clarify what we offer, to be ethical. And of course, I mean, what a utopia to try and wait for when everyone's going to have ethical offerings and everyone's going to be able to, know themselves so well. I mean, this is the practice of life. These are things, and just because I can't see that being the universal truth model for, anytime soon, doesn't mean we shouldn't cultivate those sorts of things, because you're just going to be further along in being able to know for yourself, to be able to provide something ethical when you really wanted to. The more we cultivate these sort of clarities and reflect, then I think it's just going to be super beneficial.
Yeah. And I think I personally, like, when it comes to my own sort of like moral compass and how I decide to do things, I always err on the side of connection. And what I mean by that is, I'm trying to think of how many years back this was, but in 2003, when I went into Chinese medicine school, I felt like that was the easiest way I could find a connection to the medicine, and even while we were in school, the teachers would encourage us to go into the herb room and sit with the herbs and, feel that connection with the herbs. And, I did that as well. But I have to say that I don't think I fully understood the spirit of mullein, which in Chinese medicine is jia yan ye. Like, I didn't get and understand, like, mullein when it was sitting dry in pieces in the herb room at school. I get it now after having sat in a pasture with it, with the horses around me. And, one of the horses just naturally has, like, not the best respiratory system, Jessie. And she searches it out. It's kind of wild. And that's exactly what mullein is for, is it helps clear the respiratory system. And so now I think about poor Jessie with her slight cough and runny nose, and she goes and runs and eats mullein because that she knows intuitively that helps her body.
And she did not get certified in herbs. No. She does not have her degree. She's a horse. They don't accept horses, as far as I know, into TCM school. And I think that's just such a wonderful example of what we're talking about. When do you need that certification? When is this coming from the Tao that you just, because and because you know how to sit in it and feel it and experience it, and not blind yourself to others' experiences as well. But, there's going to be things that there's a time and a place for, regulating and making sure we're safe. That's not what we're not saying discard all of that. But, there's going to be a bunch of things that if you're chasing that, I need to be, who is telling you that you're ready now? Who's regulating, who's giving you this gold star, and why do they know better than you do? Sometimes you're at a point where it's like, it's time to stop doubting myself and my abilities, and just accept that there's things that through experience, through being observant, through tapping in and having that somatic awareness. There's going to be things that because and not because you needed to learn them in a classroom.
Yeah. And I think, this word that you keep using around regulation is such an important one that I want to highlight, because I think that it's really important when we talk about making the opposite decision of something that seems very, very commonplace in society, that decision needs to be coming from a place of regulation. This is why I hesitate to use anti-capitalism in my languaging, because yes, we are looking at toxic traits in capitalism and making conscious decisions around how do I want to participate with that. But oftentimes, when we are making those choices from a dysregulated state, we end up swinging the pendulum completely to the other side, and we are anti something versus being for something. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, is even in this work of untangling what we see as unhelpful or actually trauma patterns in society and in culture and our business practices, more importantly than the action of, like, you might change your pricing structure, or you might, put a sliding scale in your work, or, so many other things that you can do to help support practices that are not capitalistic. But if they're done in dysregulation, we actually end up causing more trauma, but just on the other side of it. And so that's something that I really want to name, is that as a community, I think that a lot of folks are drawn to my work because it's like, oh, here's a different and new way to do business. It seems anti-capitalistic, and I'm very consciously choosing to not use anti in my work, because I've seen this like societal sort of like pendulum swing to the other side, and I don't want to cause any more dysregulation just from the opposite end of the spectrum.
Right, because it's so easy to have your nervous system fire up, and then now we're making decisions, responses
from a fight place.
From that place. Yeah. And a couple things. First of all, full permission for patience and forgiveness as you learn to self-regulate. It's
100%.
This is something, again, that we're deeply not taught, or that's it can take a lifetime to learn, but what a worthwhile practice that is. Mm-hmm. That is how you live more closely in tune with the life that you want, that you were designed to live. Mm-hmm. And so getting into that self-regulatory place where you can make decisions not from the things that you've learned or that are coming at you, or this hair trigger response, but decisions that come from, I know the difference between this is coming from something that I think is true or feels right, or that that I've learned and I know and I agree with, versus I'm just going to respond because I think I should, or I've been taught I have, or this is the only way I know, but it came from a place where I was just in total fear or trauma. And I love that you are bringing that work out there, and we just need more of it. And it's something you can practice on your own. I'm more of a solo learner, but that doesn't mean it's fast. And it doesn't mean that I don't ever learn things in community. So that's also a great place to have conversations about, and get out of your own head and your own perspective and limited experience, and learn with others, whether it's one-on-one or in a group. This is great work, and I think it's very much in the metal element where we clarify and reflect. And I'd love to talk about the energy of pruning too, because that comes into the fall, and I feel like there's a bit of that when you learn to self-regulate. You can reflect more clearly on what you also don't want and need to let go of, and feel safe in the pruning process. Fall, I love that you were describing earlier, fruit trees need to be heavily pruned back, and I want, please describe more of that in a second, because you're definitely more the farmer gardener than I am. I'm the one with the fancy scissors that that I made. That I'll lend you the pruning shears, and then you know what to do. But it's, I think when we think of pruning, we're like, oh God, no, if I hack off all these what look like resources, I'm going to be left with nothing, and I'm going to be under-resourced, and it looks hideous. And why I love paring back and pruning is because for myself, I know the experience of when I let go of things that I have thoughtfully know that I don't need, I am so confident that this is how I build that breathing space and how I build room for even more abundance to come in when it's springtime. That's how things are healthy. Like I'm going to get more of what I want and more of what I enjoy from the process of making room by letting go of things that no longer serve. And this came up in a weird way recently. I was thinking about things that I just started to notice things that I had been taught that I should enjoy. Like we can talk about business and practical things, but even when it comes to your leisure things and things that fill you up and the way you do tend for your body and have room to like keep going in your business, like what are the things that you think you should enjoy or be grateful for, or, you know, that you've taught are really fun and awesome, but do you really, like, do they fill your cup? And the only way to know that is to check in with your body. Like, when do I feel energized? So even into your outside business supportive time, where can you prune back things that you think are good for you, whether it's certain lessons or an activity? Are those actually the things you enjoy? Or do you need to prune some of that too and make more room for the things that, wow, I viscerally know when something delights me.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
I love this idea of pruning because I feel fairly strongly that it's like one of the dynamics in our relationship that I appreciate so much is because I'm a wood type, or rather, I think a more correct way to say that is that I have a lot of wood element within me, because I think we all have all 5 of them. I have a tendency to like put out all the branches. Like I know how to grow, I know how to be externally like outward, you know, I know like that's sort of like my nature is to be like in a growth phase,
which I love and appreciate, and it impresses me to no end. So this is the balance in our relationship, because I'm like, oh, you can do that? Okay. I'll watch more of that.
And I get really overwhelmed by all the growth, you know? And so this is, you know, I think that you were talking earlier of like, this is where, you know, mentors or having people within your inner circle who you can rely on and support and ask for advice and really like, you know, show them your inner guts and be like, okay, so like I need help here. Like those have been the times when your metal energy has been so helpful, because I go into a state of overwhelm and like overgrowth. Sometimes I can be like an English ivy that doesn't know how to stop. and so then you come in with these very clarifying questions, which are like the pruning shears, that helps me really get down to the roots of like, oh, I have to get back to my intentions. You know, I have to root back into my yin because I can be so yang. And when I'm in my yang, it's like, it's so exciting to do all the action. It's so exciting to like tick off all these things on my to-do list. And, you know, like for me, it takes a lot to overwhelm me. But when I do get overwhelmed, it's like, oh shit, like it's a hard stop. It's like a migraine in bed. And luckily it's been a while since I've had that, but I think that it comes from people like you, people like Andre, who helps produce the show, who's also my bestie. And like the two of you are so good at asking these clarifying questions, because in the fall, once the fruit trees have lost all their leaves, and you can actually see the branches pretty clearly for the structure that they are. And also you can see which branches are the most healthy, which branches are maybe somewhat out of balance for the shape of the tree. And so this is why in the fall we prune back fruit trees. And that pruning back, as you were saying, might bring on a bit of grief, A lot of fruit trees need a hard prune in the fall. And it's like, oh, like you worked so hard to like create all these branches and what's going to happen now. But ultimately, it's better for fruit production if you prune these trees back, because instead of having 50 branches that puts out, 500 shitty apples, you have 5 branches that puts out 50 really amazing apples. And so when it comes to our business work, can we prune things back for the sake of quality instead of quantity? And again, I think that this goes back to sort of those extractive practices that we're moving away from. And, if we can think about being the right fit for someone because it comes from this like clear space of intentionality versus trying to like mass produce something because it's going to make you the most amount of money. Totally different intentions. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so well described, and that just really fires me up into like why I love the natural world as an example for how to how we can use these as examples to be in our own lives. I mean, it's right there. What a beautiful example, because I think you look at a hard pruned fruit tree and you go, oh God, how am I ever, there's going to be no peaches. I've lost my haul. Like, this is insane. Like, all the fruit is gone. What am I going to eat? And you have this, it looks like it'll just never come back. Where is it, if you observe and watch and study nature, you go, oh no, this is what's actually going to happen, is that those wasted resources are going to cease to be over distributed to things that they cannot support very well, that no longer serve, concentrate back, and then really be available for more of what you want, which are the good quality and the abundant fruit. And then I feel very fortunate. I think both you and I in our lives have seen, and being, the example of that happening in our lives. How many things have we gotten rid of that look like an ending or a losing of resources? And lo and behold, here's the open door for the room for more that we, things that we enjoy. And it's so wonderful to see that happen and go, yes, this is the model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also worth noting too that oftentimes, particularly in the Western culture, we think of like fall energy as being like the beginning of the end. And I don't think it's talked about enough that actually fall energy is about saying yes and no with discernment to the appropriate things, because it's going to nourish the next cycle. And because it's actually going to renew you for the next phase. And it's the reason why I put it at the very beginning of the work in Business Alchemist Mentorship, because I want us to start from this place of really coming to a clear understanding of what we stand for and what we don't stand for in our businesses. And it's very, very individual. If there's 20 people in BAM, 20 different ideas of what their businesses stand for. And yet the thing that they all have in common is this understanding of being able to use the lessons that we find within metal to nourish and compost. It should be the other way around, to compost and then nourish the next phase of what our business is going to look like. And I don't know if you've heard of this movie. It's a ridiculous movie. I just went and watched it yesterday, and it left me in complete tears. It's called Marcel the Shell with Shoes On.
Oh, no, I haven't, but it looks like the kind of cartoon I would avoid because it looks like it would make me cry.
Yeah, it's I don't even know. It's like live action, but then there's like there's a shell that has a personality. Anyways, it's a whole thing. But I don't want to give the poem away, but there's a really, really beautiful poem that they recite in that by, I had to look it up earlier, by John Weeks. And it's exactly like this idea of fall. It's called The Trees, and it's this idea of fall actually being a renewal phase, of being something that starts afresh. And I think we need to understand that more about these like yin yang cycles. Is we have a tendency to think about fall as, we focus on the yin part, but actually there's a little dot of yang within that, and that's sort of like the little seed to, start that momentum. But that momentum is going to come from rooting into intentions, and from that intentional place having there be aligned action, so that in the springtime, the greens that come up like are the most healthy and the most vibrant and the most nourished they can be.
I love that. And I love that you start with fall. And that's a difference, I think, also between linear and cyclical thinking, is because we, if we plot things out on a line, when you come to the end, you're like, oh no, it's the end. And, nothing comes after this. Or the, delusion that there's this end point in our lives where it's like, once I've achieved this on my linear plot line, that's when the happiness and the satisfaction comes in. And it's like, well, now curve that. We just, that should be plotted along all these spaces and experiences, good and bad, because we don't get there. Then, maybe we can celebrate, we can have great experiences, things that we prefer over other experiences, things that are not traumatic. Absolutely. But, I think it's been proven that, once there is no end point where you're like, now I'm happy, now I'm satisfied. And, a few days later, however long it takes, it's like, oh God, what's the next thing? Or what do I do? Or maybe I need more. And so using those tools, those resources, like you've described, of being able to self-regulate and tap in and have clarity are so useful. And how lovely to start with, like, to think of it as spring begins in the fall. Like when we've reached fall, it's not fall, winter, death. It's like fall, rest, spring. Like we're getting ready for your spring what kind of spring you have is dictated by what kind of fall you had, and how much did you prune the trees, and how much did you harvest, and how much did you, put things to bed and rest and, nourish them through the winter. So everything I love in the 5 elements, like they're all connected to each other, and they all regulate and support and nourish each other and relate to each other. So we don't have these false truncated sections that don't relate to the other parts of our life. So in spring, like that seed planting, I can think of it as, if that's your marketing plans and the time you're going to write your business plan, if you didn't get clarity about what you stood for and your purpose, and develop some tools around pruning some of the responses and blocks and habits. I think you used the word blocks earlier. If you start that in the fall phase, and where in your business your fall phase lands, it could be you're starting something new, you've been running something for 20 years. Maybe it's actually July, but you're in the fall phase of your business. Like, that's okay. Like, these phases all cycle around. And I love that, because there's, this continuous renewal, and there's always this expectance of not just growth and growth and growth, because I'm afraid to stop growing. It's like, it's okay. We're going to cycle through things, and everything feels good because I know it's in an appropriate place, and I'm not afraid that I'm going to get stuck in this one phase and it's going to look like this forever.
Yeah. Thank you for naming that, because I think, if we look at regenerative models, whether it's in agriculture, like we talked about in the late summer podcast episode, or in your business, it has to be rooted in cycles, because the way that capitalism wants us to run our businesses is to constantly be in a spring phase. And that can't feel good for anyone. I don't know anyone that feels good for, you know, and that's why we run into things like burnout and
and self-disappointment because you're not coming through, you're not producing on this sort of ridiculously expected level where you don't have rest and you don't have renewal and you don't listen. And then it's a great recipe for self-doubt, questioning yourself, you know, having we talked in late summer, your source, like your center of individual power and stamina. Like that's a great recipe for eating away at that, because you're like, oh no, I haven't reach this target, or I'm so overwhelmed by the fact that I'm adding on, and not resting or letting go ever.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why I think that, you know, when I came up with the curriculum for Business Alchemist Mentorship, I had it in mind for really anybody who's on that entrepreneurial journey, whether you've been in it for 10 years or 15 years, or you're just starting out. Because I want us to start understanding that everything is cyclical. And so these concepts that I talk about, you know, I feel like even just within the 2 years that I've had Empowered Curiosity, I've been through multiple seasons where I've had to refine my metal over and over again, partially because I've changed and shifted even the kind of people that I've served now. You know, when Empowered Curiosity first began, it was more of relationship coaching. And now we're in this phase of spiritual business coaching. And so, you know, that changes my entire, you know, form of marketing and how I speak to people. And that required a deep pause in fall to be able to do that. And I think anybody who's within a transition in their business or are feeling like that hustle culture, burnt out feeling, you know, we need to start adopting these more cyclical ways of being, not just in your business, but also in the rest of your life. You know, this can't just be how you embody one part of your life and then you forget about it in other parts of your life. This is what embodiment is it's a lived feeling in your body that ripples out into everything that you do.
100%. Thank you. I love that.
Christina, I think we covered a lot. And as always, I appreciate that you're willing to jump on these episodes and just super nerd out hard with me about Taoist medicine, which is probably the nerdiest thing I can ever say. But so grateful that I get to have a friend who is kind of like just as much of a nerd as I am.
Love it. Thank you. These are always such a joy. And, you know, I always learn something new as we're speaking. So it's a great dialogue and they're really fun to do. So, and wonderful concepts that I think are very interesting to get out there more and more for people to digest themselves and, you know, see how that lands for you. And if that reframes a few things, maybe in a helpful way. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm so glad that you do them.
Yeah. And for anybody who is curious, we've got a episode that we did last year, episode 21, about surrendering into the metal element, and we'll leave that in the resources list for you to check out if you want to learn a bit more of just like, it's more of an overview of the metal element and not as specific about businesses. It's more about feelings.
I love that episode.
It's a good one. And then if you are curious about the emotion of grief, which we touched on briefly here, but I had my friend Amar Atma come on the podcast, and he's a grief coach, and so that's episode 42, and he just, oh man, like I think you were saying this earlier, of like, he's the first person that we think of when we think about grief. And just,
which you would think, oh, poor guy, what a thing to be associated with. But because he's just such a beautiful human and can embody the hard things with you and in such a beautiful way, and in that way that simultaneously feels hopeful and renewing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that one is episode 42. If grief is the emotion that is present for you, I highly recommend that you go check that one out. So thank you, friend. Thank you, friends out there in the podcast world, and we'll see you next time.
See you soon. Winter time.